Riot considered adding more complexity depth to champions through the leveling system, like a skill tree in Dota? I mean, that's always something worth considering. We actually tested a long time ago. We tested an Aghanim Scepter. For those who don't know what Aghanim Scepter is, it's an item that gives you, changes your ultimate. It's in Dota. We actually had a test of that once for some league champs. So as an example, if you got it on GNAR, his ultimate would knock you back until you hit a wall. And there was a playtest where GNAR got the Aghs, and then he went mid lane, and he ulted down mid, and the enemy champions got knocked from mid tower to his fountain. And landed in his fountain and died. It was pretty great. That was something we tested a long time ago, because it's like things like that are really, really cool. The hard part about stuff like that is if you do anything like that, like, hey, here's a new system that changes how level ups work, or a new item that, you know, messes with every ultimate or things like that, that is, you have to do that change for every single character in the game. So like, even as an example of Viego. Viego was a massive project, so was Sylas. Because even though you don't directly see it, Viego and Sylas both required that we change every character in the game to work with them. To some degree. It involved like rescripts and stuff like that. And so those are fairly massive undertakings. And so we have to be very confident that anytime we were to do a system like that, that the end result will be worth it, right? And it'll make the game better. But generally, like playing stuff like Dota and Deadlock and Here's the Storm, I personally think that like a talent system of some sort would be really, really fun in League of Legends. But it definitely would be a fairly massive undertaking, but dude, talents in Dota, talents in HOTS, talents in Deadlock, all those games are really, really cool for having those things in it. I'd say one of the problems with League of Legends' current skill system, in terms of its leveling up system, so to clarify what I'm talking about, you know how in League, when you level up, you can choose a rank of a skill? I think one of the problems is that we've balanced it so that basically there is no choice. There are very, very few champions in League of Legends who actually have a choice about what to rank up. They have a very fixed rank up order. They should do it every game. And if we ever see them deviating from that, we often balance them so that they stop deviating from it. So it's like, oh, you started maxing W on ZERI and doing this like poke build with AP? No. Or you started maxing E on Nasus and like instantly clearing the wave and without any interaction? Perhaps not, right? And like, I think those changes, when we do them, tend to be like, you know, well-meaning, where it's like a lot of times when a character is like ranking up, you know, in quotes, the incorrect spells, it's often representative of something that's potentially somewhat degenerate. But it has resulted over the years in like, what does our skill rank up system mean when the majority of champions don't really get much interest from it? There are some who do. There's characters like Morgana, who, depending on what she maxes first, is either a jungler or a mid laner. There's characters like Kog'Maw, who, depending on whether he maxes first, is either an AP champion or an AD champion. So there are characters who have different max orders who get actual real value out of it. But I do think it's a little tragic that so many characters in League don't actually get much value out of the skill maxing system. It's just kind of like a rote thing they're supposed to do the same every game. But again, on the flip side, the way we got here is a lot of times if you're maxing the incorrect skills, it often results in, like, in many cases, a worse character in terms of gameplay and enjoyment. So it's like, it's definitely a tough spot. Is there any way to make YORICK not a Noob Stomper? There are things we could do, but a hard part with YORICK is that a lot of the things we could do with YORICK would be against his identity as a champion. So what I mean by that is YORICK is a character who creates a bunch of minions and split pushes and runs them at you and has a minion following him around. And like all these things he is doing, a lot of them, like by their nature, are easy to play against if you know what you're doing. Like if you're good at the game, you run away from the minions. If you're good at the game, you kill the minions. If you're good at the game, you target the maiden. And this is doubled down by the fact that his E is a fairly easy to dodge spell if you're good at the game. And his W goes from being an absolutely insane CC that can last 3 to 4 seconds to doing literally nothing at all if you're playing against a good player who knows to attack the spell. And so I would say, outside of giving him new spells that don't have those types of counterplay, the only other thing I would think of is like we could do things to just make him more unfair. So as an example, if his E was easier to hit, it probably doesn't change much in low MMR because low MMR players already can't dodge it, where it would probably make him better in high MMR. At the cost though of doing that would make him more binary of a champion because he'd have less things you could dodge. If his maiden was significantly unfair towards people who attacked it, then it probably wouldn't do much in low MMR because low MMR players don't attack the maiden already, but probably would make him a lot better in high MMR. But again, at the cost of removing counterplay. And so I do think there are some things we could do to Yorick to make him better in high MMR. It's just scary because those things probably involve making him less fair. And this is not a character who already can feel somewhat binary at times. What do you think about a change something like this for Yorick? Maiden level 6, no ghoul spawn, level 11, slow C and ghoul spawn, level 16, how it is now. So that's not going to help him in high elo. Because in high elo, you need to be good early, not late. And I don't know if making it so he can't spawn things is good for him because it just destroys the character's fantasy, right? The whole point of the character is making ghouls, right? And so I don't know if a change that says Yorick's ghouls like aren't a thing anymore is long-term good for Yorick. Well, not obviously I'm being hyperbolic. The proposal isn't that they wouldn't be a thing, but it's like any change that like significantly reduces the impact of like Yorick's ghouls, especially for the large part of the early game, it's like I think that's just kind of against the point of the champion, right? It's kind of how we're talking about like, yes, there's a lot of changes we could do to a lot of characters to make them like good in high MMR, but like if it's at the cost of a character's fantasy, it's not worth it in my opinion. I would rather find ways to make Yorick have lots of ghouls and have those ghouls be stronger for better players. ZERI needs her passive back? My guess with ZERI would just need some power back. We nerfed ZERI because of mid lane when she was already a 30% presence. And so I'd argue we were, like in hindsight, it feels like we nerfed a character who was already on a little bit of the weak side and was on her way out. Which, I'm not saying it was a bad nerf, because it was pretty important we didn't have just a ton of AD carries mid lane at Worlds. But considering how she was nerfed and why she was nerfed, I definitely could see her being in a weak spot right now, but I don't think she necessarily needs her passive back. She probably could just use a buff, because we nerfed her when she was already not on the strongest side for pro to begin with. Again, not saying it was a bad nerf, just noting that it was a pretty important one to guarantee no non-stop 80 carry mid at Worlds, and so I wonder if she does need some follow-up after that. Would you consider Nocturne an assassin or a bruiser? Depends on how he builds. I think he's an assassin if he builds assassin, and if he's a diver if he builds both, but I think he's like on the diver side of things. If I was like to differentiate between like a definition of a diver and an assassin, I'd say divers go in and then they probably don't go out, and so they probably have to have more survivability to stay in, versus an assassin is usually able to in and out, and then typically needs less survivability to then do that. So maybe that would be like my comparisons where like what's the difference between a Vi and a Zed or a Nocturne and a Kha'Zix.